Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. I'm calling the meeting to order now. Madam Clerk, do we have regrets?
We have regrets from Councillor Hutchins.
And Council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest?
Your Worship, this way.
Yes,
I
sir.
have one.
Well, away you go.
I declare a pecuniary interest in item number 9, Hopedale Presbyterian Church. I'm a voting member of the church, and I've been quite involved in the application that's before us this evening.
Okay, thank you. Shall we have a mover and seconder to go into committee of the whole? Councillor Duddick, Councillor Giddings, all in favor? That's carried. We're now in a relaxed rule environment called committee of the whole so that we can hear information from the public in a less formal setting. And I am gratified to see that the electronics have finally caught up. All right, so Council, we have a number of consent items, 2 of them, and 2 public consent items, no confidential consent items. How do you wish to deal with the consent items? Is there a mover? Councillor Duddick? All those, any speakers? All those in favor? The consent items are adopted. So that brings us to our first public hearing item. And this is the public meeting report for the zoning bylaw amendment for the Halton Catholic District School Board at 304, 312, 324, and 332 Rebecca Street. And the recommendation here is to receive the comments from the public. And if you give your attention to Mr. Barrett, he will summarize the report you've read for the benefit of the public. Mr. Barrett?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just load up the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. This is the statutory public meeting related to a zoning bylaw amendment submitted by Halton Catholic District School Board to rezone the subject lands to a community use zone. The report can be found on page 23 to 32 of tonight's agenda. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to obtain any public input related to this application. No recommendation on the application is proposed tonight. Staff will return in the future following the comprehensive review of the application with a recommendation report. The subject lands are located on the south side of Rebecca Street, west of Dorval Drive, adjacent to the existing high school. In November of 2015, the applicant submitted a site alteration application to permit grading and landscaping of the subject 4 residential lots. However, pursuant to the zoning bylaw, the proposed development would constitute a private park land use, which is not permitted in a residential zone. Accordingly, the applicant submitted the subject application to rezone the lands to the same zone as the adjacent high school, which is community use, which permits a private park land use. The subject lands are designated low-density residential and are zoned RL 3 suffix 0. The applicant proposes to amend the zoning bylaw to community use, which would permit, amongst other land uses, a private park land use. A public information was held on September 20th of this year, where 2 members of the public were in attendance. A complete analysis of the application will be undertaken and includes a review of the listed matters which have been identified to date. Comments received at this public meeting will also be considered as part of the comprehensive review. In conclusion, Your Worship, staff put forth the following recommendation as shown for Council's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you for the information. Council, do you have questions for Mr. Barrett before I go to delegations or look for delegations? Madam Clerk, do we have a listed delegation on this item?
We have no listed delegations.
Are there members of the public here with information for council to consider on this application? I see none. I'll look for a motion to receive the information. Councillor Chisholm, all those in favor? And that's carried. And we can now turn to item 4, which is the same kind of report, the public input report, let's call it. And look, I think we get Mr. Barrett again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. This is the statutory public meeting related to an official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and draft plan of subdivision to permit the development of 6 townhouse dwelling units. The report can be found on page 45 of tonight's agenda. Again, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to obtain public input related to this application. No recommendation on the application is proposed tonight. Staff will return in the future following comprehensive review of the application with a recommendation report. The subject lands are located at the southeast corner of East Street and St. Anne's Court within the Bronny Village growth area. The applicant is proposing to develop the site with 6 freehold townhouse dwelling units. All proposed units are proposed to be accessed from East Street. The elevations submitted by the applicant show the proposed facade along East Street together with a 3-story townhouse built form. The lands are located within the Bronny Village growth area and designated as a low-density residential. For background, concurrent with the subject development application, the town's official plan review is ongoing, which includes a review of the policies that direct growth and change in Bronny Village. On January 16th of this year, town staff presented draft policy changes for Bronny Village to the Livable Oakville Council Subcommittee. Staff subsequently presented the draft policy changes to the public on March 1st of this year for further public input and feedback. Based on this feedback, adjustments were made in the latest draft OPA, which will be presented to Council tomorrow. Amongst other updates, the latest draft OPA proposes the same medium-density residential designation circled in red on the subject lands. However, the lands immediately to the south would retain the original Main Street 1 designation, whereas they were originally proposed to be redesignated to medium-density residential. Overall, this draft amendment would permit a townhouse built form on the subject lands. The subject lands are presently zoned RL3 suffix 0 by the zoning bylaw, which does not permit the proposed development. The applicant proposes to rezone the lands to RM1 to permit the development of 6 freehold townhouse dwelling units. A public information was held on September 19th of this year, where 6 members of the public attended. A complete analysis of the application will be undertaken and includes a review of listed matters which have been identified to date. Comments received at this public meeting will also be considered as part of the comprehensive review. In conclusion, Your Worship, staff put forth the following recommendation for Council's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Council, do you have questions? Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. Paul, thank you very much for the report. What's the, how long are the driveways on East Street?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure it's the exact length. I can look that up, though.
And would they only be able to fit one vehicle then?
That's my understanding. 1 vehicle in the driveway and 1 vehicle in the garage.
Okay, so 2 vehicles, 1 in the garage and 1 vehicle. And what's the overall height of the proposed townhouses?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the overall height isn't shown on the elevations, but the RM1 zone height limit is 12 meters, and no amendment to that regulation is proposed by the applicant.
Okay, and then out back, is there any proposed balconies, Juliet balconies, or anything in the backyard?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the rear elevation was not submitted as part of the application yet, so that could be a question you could pose to the applicant.
And again, do we know if what sort of landscaping or tree protection would be included for the residents of St. Anne's Crescent who would be backing onto this?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, tree protection would be reviewed as part of this application, as part of the subsequent site plan application, if that's deemed necessary. So the applicant has submitted a conceptual landscape plan which does show tree plantings along East Street and in the backyards of the freehold townhouse units.
So those would be new tree plantings then, not keeping the maintaining green barrier that circles the, I think, 125 East Street now?
It would include both, so retaining existing trees and planting new ones, as long as they're viable. I understand there's some ash trees in that area which are diseased, which would be removed.
And then lastly, and I apologize, I don't know if I saw it, did they do a shadow survey or a shadow study as well?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, they did not do a shadow study. That was not requested of them by staff as part of the pre-consultation meeting, just because of the built form that's proposed.
Okay, thank you. That's all for now, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Chisholm, did you have questions?
Thank you, Your Worship. Right now, presently, how many existing single-family dwellings are on St. Anne's? How many existing?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, on the subject lots or
Yes.
St. Anne? So there's two.
St. Anne's, the entire court. If I'm looking at it, my eyes are not that great. I'm counting probably 8 single-family dwellings.
That's correct, 8.
Okay. And the suggestion is to putting 6 townhomes on the said property?
That's correct. So there's 2 lots currently with a single attached dwelling on each, and the applicant's proposing 6 townhouse units.
Okay. So looking at those existing homes I'm going back a little bit of history, are probably built in the 80s. The height of those homes would be approximately 7 meters, 8 meters?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's probably a good estimate. The zoning would permit slightly more than that.
Okay. So the suggestion is now these townhomes can go to 12 meters based on the zoning.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. The zoning would permit 12 meters that they're proposing.
Okay, one final question. I might be jumping ahead here, but in the Bronte Village growth area, and just for clarity, maybe I'm confused on this one, on page 167 of the official plan amendment, St. Anne's Court, hold on here. There's no identified intensification opportunities for St. Anne's Court, which are designated and zoned as low-density residential uses as per the existing built condition. In review of these aspects, staff are of the opinion that the removal of the properties of St. Anne's Court from the growth area is appropriate and would not be considered downzoning. So is this contradictory, or is that in keeping to what you're proposing tonight, or not proposing what the report's saying? I just want to make sure we're on the same wavelength here.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what's being proposed tonight, the lots front East Street. So the St. Anne Court comment in the staff report, that relates to the dwellings that front onto St. Anne's Court, the cul-de-sacs, not the subject lots.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions from council? Madam Clerk, do we have a registered delegation?
We have 2 delegations, the first being Clive Martin.
Mr. Martin, welcome. Council looks forward to your information. I should note, council has your written information,
Yes, it does.
and I can vouch for their ability to read.
Good. Mr. Mayor, Council, thank you for listening to me today. I live in St. Anne's Court. My property actually abuts these 2 properties. But I've also discussed this with other members of other residents of St. Anne's Court, and there are significant concerns about the size of this property and the density. And specifically, I guess, I'm a little confused because I heard today that the height requirement was 12 meters. The documentation that I've reviewed and that is currently on the website is indicating that they want a 14-meter high property. So I think that needs to be clarified.
The zoning permits 12.
Correct. And that's my first issue, obviously, is exceeding the zoning for even the next level of rezoning of that property. Property is currently low-density residential. It's proposed in the growth review that it will be updated to medium-density residential, which gives it the 12-metre high roof. Does that make sense?
No, you lost me. Maybe Mr. Barrett can help us.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the RM1 zone that the applicant is seeking to rezone the property, the maximum building height would be 12 meters. The elevations that the applicant submitted don't have a height on them. And the applicant's not proposing to amend that provision of the zoning bylaw on a site-specific basis, meaning they're not seeking additional height beyond the 12 meters.
Okay, I'm a little confused then, because the first elevation, or the elevation that's on the website right now, requests 14 meters.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the version that I have here doesn't show an overall height for the townhouse. So if they're showing 14 meters on the elevation plan, that would be inconsistent with the zoning bylaw amendment that was submitted in support of the application, which doesn't seek to amend that general provision of the bylaw.
Okay, I'll keep an eye on that myself. The other aspect of it is the number of stories that they're looking at. If you look at the front elevation, it appears to be 3-story property. It is in fact a 4-story property. We were advised by the developers at the public meeting on September the 19th that there are in fact going to be bedrooms in that roof, and there will be dormer windows at the back which will look out onto St Anne's Court. So we have a significant concern about the fact that that's going to be significantly higher, and that those dormer windows are going to be looking out onto our court and into our properties. So again, I guess we're looking for clarification on that, because we haven't seen the rear elevations in any way.
Well, in the staff report, they list the issues that they have gleaned from public input to be of concern. One of those that's listed is privacy. Mm-hmm. So that means that they'll be evaluating the application against that set of issues to see if the application passes all of our tests. The process is the collection of public feedback, and then staff go away and consider how to account for everybody's concerns. And then it could be months from now, they'll bring a recommendation report to council that will say how they dealt with each of these concerns. Does that clear things up?
I do understand that there's another cycle into the process. I'm really just emphasizing our concerns at this time, just to get, I guess, to emphasize the points.
Right. So our business tonight is to make sure that the issues are accurately listed, or any that aren't listed that need to be added are mentioned so that staff can add them. So are you satisfied with the report in terms of the issues it lists that staff will be vetting the application against?
I believe that, yes, there's, I guess, assuming that my original communication is part of that staff report to you and that you have seen that, I would say yes. Okay, there is one other aspect I would like to address today.
We'd like to hear it.
Okay, and that's the question of transitional areas. The official plan talks about transitional areas where growth area development abuts residential areas, and it specifically identifies the Sovereign Street as a transitional area between the residentials on the north side and the Lakeshore or the Main Street developments on the south side. I would like for the same attention or the same principles to be applied to these two properties as a transitional area, so that, as is described, the sensitive transition is applied, and that principle is applied in the same way as it would be applied to a Sovereign Street South development.
I'm sure that staff will take note of that.
Okay. I was going to talk to safety and traffic. I've already talked about that in my previous communication, and parking is a separate issue. So I'm taking it you already have that information, so I won't waste any more time talking about that.
Are there questions for Mr. Martin? Thank you, sir, for your information. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
The next delegation speaking to this item is Eric Mertzo from Sabrina Homes.
Welcome, sir. Council looks forward to your information.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I'm actually the agent on behalf of Sabrina Homes from CanDevCon Limited, and we're doing the planning work at this moment. And just to alleviate, I think, some of Mr. Martin's concerns before, we've had our public consultation and open house with staff and the neighboring residents, and there has been some changes since that time. I know Mr. Martin was concerned about the height being one of them. So just to confirm, it is 12 meters. We are going with a 12-meter height for these units as per the zoning bylaw. And there actually is no loft space or additional unit in that roof truss area. We've since canceled that. So what you see on the screen there is essentially what we are going to be building in terms of unit space. It is maybe a 3-story in that sense.
Is the issues list as identified by staff in the report satisfactory to you?
Yes, we're aware of the issues. We've consulted with staff and the public, and we understand that even privacy is one item where it's an ongoing kind of process where we have to make some adjustments and provide some mitigation for that.
Great. Thank you for your information.
Okay.
Are there other members of the public with information for council on this file? Is there a member of council who'd like to move receipt? Councilor O'Meara, all in favor? And that is carried. That brings us to public meeting report, proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendments, Town of Oakville former public works site, item number 6. Oh, I beg your pardon. Halton District School Board, Minkies. It scrolled up, honest.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I just want to point out one small typo in the title or in the agenda. It references the Halton District School Board when it should be the Halton Catholic District School Board. The report can be found on page 45 of tonight's agenda. The purpose of the report tonight is to introduce the planning application by the Halton Catholic District School Board in conjunction with the required statutory public meeting. As noted in the staff report, there are no decisions to be made at this time, and staff will return at a future date with a recommendation report, and the report is simply to be received by council along with any comments from the public. The property is located west of Coronation Drive and south of Northridge Trail. The site comprises an area of 2.7 hectares with 134 meters of frontage along Coronation Drive. The site is currently vacant. Residential detached homes, predominantly 2 stories in height, surround the property with homes backing onto the subject site on 3 sides. And on the Coronation Drive side, detached homes are across the street, which face onto the site. Northridge Trail Park is located across Coronation Drive from the site near the northeast corner. The site is currently owned by the Halton Catholic District School Board. The school board has determined this to be a surplus site. The school board has followed the established protocol set out by provincial legislation in dealing with surplus school lands. They have now reached the stage where the site can now be offered for sale to a third party. And the school board is currently in negotiations with Minkies Developments for the purchase of the subject site. The proposal being presented tonight has been submitted by Minkies with permission of the school board. The application proposes a plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment and is seeking approval to develop 49 detached dwellings with an approximate density of 23 units per net hectare. The proposal is for dwellings to front onto Coronation Drive on the east, and a new public street will connect to Coronation Drive on the south portion, and the public street will create a loop on the interior of the site with dwellings fronting onto both sides of that loop. The outer lots will back onto the adjacent lots surrounding the site, and which also back onto the subject site. The plan of subdivision also proposes a walkway block to connect to an existing walkway block that already exists that connects Tesla Crescent to the subject site. The lands are designated as low-density residential in the livable Oakville official plan, and this designation permits detached housing, among other housing forms, with a density of up to 29 units per site hectare. The subject property is currently zoned CU community use. A zoning bylaw amendment is necessary to implement the proposal, and the lands surrounding the subject property are zoned site-specific RL5 on the south and east, and RL8 on the north and the west, all of which are residential low zones which permit detached housing, among other housing forms. The applicant has submitted a zoning bylaw amendment which is proposing to rezone the property to a site-specific RL8. Most of the site-specific regulations pertain to the interior lots, identified as Block 1 on the diagram above, and these relate to increased floor area, reduced minimum lot area, reduced minimum rear yard setback, and increased building height. For the outer portion of the site, or Block 2, the outer circle, the applicant is requesting two site-specific variations for increased floor area and reduced lot frontage on a corner lot. Just to kind of give some visual to those, here's an excerpt from the urban design brief which demonstrates a number of possible housing models that the applicant is currently considering. The requested site-specific RL8 zoning is intended to allow development of houses such as these. The application is currently under review by staff and technical agencies. A complete analysis of the application will be undertaken and includes a review of the listed matters that you see here. Mainly conformity with livable Oakville and compatibility of the proposed subdivision and zoning with the existing neighborhood for things such as lot area, lot frontages, configuration of the lots, coverage, the pedestrian connections, floor areas, setbacks, building heights, etc., as well as a technical review of the submitted supporting studies. A public information meeting for this application was held on September 13 of this year. 10 people attended the meeting. Comments received during the public meeting tonight and other comments already received will be considered and included in a forthcoming recommendation report. In conclusion, staff put forth the following recommendation, and this concludes my presentation.
I knew I made a mistake. Thank you very much for the information. Councillor Adams has a question for you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all the material you've presented. I think you've captured the issues that I heard at the various meetings. There was also a public meeting held by the applicant separately from ours, and I just wanted to thank the applicant for that extra effort that they put in. The one question I had for you that I think members of the public might be interested in knowing is, when do you think that this item will come back to council?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I anticipate a resubmission of the application by the applicant very shortly after this meeting. Potentially early next year might be a target when we could come back with a recommendation report, depending on the quality of that resubmission.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Madam Clerk, are there delegations on this item?
We have Michael Bizrat, who is the applicant, speaking to this item.
Welcome, sir. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I am Michael Bissett with Bousfield, a planning consultant for the applicant. Given this is an information meeting, I don't want to take up a lot of your time. I think you should be listening to the public at this point in time. I think Jeff's done a good job of summarizing the application, but if there's any questions, I just want you to know that we're here. We did have a meeting, an open house. Menkes had an open house in November 2017, and again, in 2016, and another one in September. So that was the two meetings we've had. If there's any questions, I can answer them.
Thank you very much for appearing. Councillor O'Meara.
Sorry, Your Worship, thanks. I do have a quick question.
Sure.
Is there proposed to have on-street parking? Are those roads going to be wide enough for on-street parking in that cul-de-sac?
It'll be public standard, so there could be on-street parking. It's going to be a city standard with one side will have a sidewalk and one side will not. As it stands, it hasn't been gone through review yet, but it's possible there will be on-street parking.
The reason I ask, sometimes after these things get developed, then councillors get plagued with phone calls saying there's no room to park on the streets when I have my friends over, and
Right.
we say, well, there's nothing really we can do about that because it's already built. So that's hence my question. So thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you for your representation of the party people. Is there a member of council with a motion to receive the information? Councillor Lischina, let me just check. Is there anyone else here with information for council on this file? Councillor Lischina has moved receipt of the information. All in favor? And that's carried. Now let's do number 6. Thank you, Jeff. Welcome, Trish.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. I'd like to also introduce the other members of the staff team that have worked on this project besides myself: Gabe Charles, Carly Dodds, Jeff Abma, and Shadi Adab. There are also several other staff members from other town departments that are assisting in the master planning process for these lands. Tonight's report can be found on page 75 of tonight's agenda. And the purpose of this report is to introduce the proposed changes to the official plan and the zoning bylaw amendment in conjunction with the required statutory meeting requirements. As noted by my report, there are no decisions to be made at this time, and the report is to be received by council. The subject property is outlined in white on this slide and is located on the west side of Trafalgar and south of Oak Park Boulevard. The property is bounded by Glen Ashton Drive, Trafalgar Road, and the future extension of Taunton Road. The property is ideally situated adjacent to Trafalgar Road, which is planned as a multimodal transportation corridor. The subject lands are part of the Uptown Core growth area outlined in red on this slide. The subject property was once the town's public works yard and was declared surplus to the town's land needs in 2000. The property has been on the market for several years, and development of previously vacant lands is underway adjacent to the site, including the Oak Park mixed-use building at the southwest corner of Oak Park Boulevard, and the townhouses along Taunton Road, which are shown outlined in yellow. As well, there is the currently under construction 6- and 12-story MSHE Branthaven apartment building that's directly north of the site and outlined in red. The 7.2 hectare property is vacant and generally flat. At the southern end of the property, there are 2 pipelines that cross the property and a hydro easement in favor of Hydro One. Preliminary environmental investigations have been undertaken for this site, and some salt contamination has been identified due to the use of the property as the former public works site. Further environmental investigative work will progress on the site in the short term to evaluate the extent of the contamination. The subject property is designated urban core, which reflects a strong urban focus. The intent of the designation within the town's growth area is to provide opportunities for mixed-use buildings, standalone residential, retail and service commercial, restaurant, and office uses. The existing height permissions allow for a minimum of 8 stories and maximum of 12 stories, with bonusing opportunities to accommodate an additional 4 stories of height. This would allow 16 stories if a Section 37 agreement is entered into. These are the existing permissions. The zoning bylaw identifies the subject lands as mixed use 4 with a special provision 307 and it's subject to a holding provision. A little history on the planning for the site includes the Uptown Core Review in 2007, and this was an important study completed in support of developing the town's new livable Oakville official plan in 2009. The review and subsequent policies designated the site for a mix of uses, predominantly taller, high-density apartment buildings with retail, commercial, and office uses at grade. The work from 2007 was tested to the official plan, for the official plan review completion. Factors such as the new provincial policies, quality of urban design, and implications that new development could have in relation to the transportation network, overall land use mix, and livability of the area were all assessed for the long-term vision of the site. A development scheme for the subject lands considered a potential of 1,909 residential units on the former Public Works site in a range of building forms with a mix of uses including retail at grade and medium to high density residential and/or offices above. The intent was to ensure higher densities could support transit and contribute to the neighborhood's vibrancy. The Public Works site staff team today was tasked with coming up with potential options for the redevelopment of the former works site. Staff revisited the original Uptown Core Review that I just spoke of to determine whether the original assumptions affecting the site remain true given the surrounding development completed or underway development and current market trends. Staff undertook a master planning exercise to understand the constraints affecting the site as well as the existing built context. This process included identifying the policies and guidelines and neighboring built and under construction context that influence the redevelopment of the site. Identifying the site-specific constraints, we used this information to form a road network and development blocks that made sense. We allocated the land uses and built form that allowed for appropriate intensification as well as the transition to the proposed development blocks. The result will eventually be a new master plan that will identify the development blocks, phases, minimum densities, and appropriate built form. The proposed development blocks are identified around the various pipeline and hydro easements, which bisect the site, as well as the planned and proposed road network. The extension of the park system is shown at the southern end of the site, and new park and open space opportunities are proposed at the heart of the site. The master plan exercise has subscribed to the town's official plan objectives and policies, along with the town's livable by design manual. The proposed official plan amendment would maintain the same designation as the site currently enjoys. The new height schedule in livable Oakville for the site would permit 16 stories as of right, but only in select blocks. An additional 4 stories may be permitted, but again, only through bonusing and would be limited throughout the site. The heights will be spelled out in an exception within the official plan and regulated through the zoning bylaw. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment considers some modest tweaks to ensure the appropriate built form based on the official plan review amendments mentioned on the earlier slides. As you can see on this slide, there are varying heights permitted throughout the site, in contrast to the existing height permissions of only 8 to 12 stories that we have in place now. Zone B and C allow for more transition of heights on the eastern edge of the site to complement the existing built form on the west side of Taunton Road. The most noticeable change will be to permit standalone townhouses in Zone C, where the built form for townhouses can be a maximum of 4 stories. Currently, townhouses are only permitted where they share a common wall with an apartment building. This will be changed to allow for standalone townhouses. Taller built form is located closer to Oak Park Boulevard at the north end of the site in Zone A and along Trafalgar Road. And as the slide indicates, there is a minimum requirement for 1,215 units to be built on the site. Matters to be considered is a complete analysis of the development concept is underway and includes a review of the following matters that have been identified to date: the neighboring built form and appropriate transition, a balance between open space and built form, shadow impacts, privacy and overlook, planned intensification, bonusing considerations for what benefits the town would like to see in exchange for height on this site. Next steps include further environmental work to be undertaken, as well as studying the water, wastewater, and stormwater capacity in the area. As part of the 2009 Uptown Core Review, a transportation study was undertaken. However, due to the currency of the study, an update is required. That work is currently underway. Once the work is completed, the master plan can be finalized, and a final recommendation report, including the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, will be brought forward at the same time for council's consideration. As council will recall, direction was provided to create a municipal development corporation. The refinements being proposed through the master plan exercise and resulting amendments will assist the municipal development corporation in implementing a development scheme with specific phases and blocks without the need to attempt to develop the whole of the subject site at one time. Planning staff will continue to review and analyze the proposed recommendations and amendment and address all the technical matters along with submitted public comments and report to council at a future meeting. In conclusion, staff put forward the following recommendation as shown for council's consideration: that the report from the Planning Services Department entitled Public Meeting Report, Former Public Works Site be received, and that the comments from the public with respect to the town-initiated official plan and zoning bylaw amendment to implement the master plan for the former public works site be received. Thank you.
Thank you, Trish. Councilor, other questions? Oh, there's a few here. Let's go with the ward councilor first. Councilor Knoll.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you for the report and all the work done on this. It seems like it's kind of like Groundhog Day to be dealing with this again after almost 2 decades of going around and around in circles, but it seems like we've got some solid planning going on to potentially guide the future of this property. A couple questions for you. First of all, you mentioned that there's a lot of impacts on the southern portion of the property with pipeline easements and hydro easements and such. Has the master plan work been vetted by or at least reviewed with the easement holders on those properties to get a clear understanding of what their expectations are and for them to understand what our plans are?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have spoken with Hydro One, TransCanada, and Union Gas to understand their limits and setback requirements. We understand their crossing requirements as well as their excavation requirements for underground parking. Until a thorough development application is proposed, we just know sort of the requirements to date, and then when an application is put forward, that detailed review will take place.
What possible use could that hydro easement be for on that property at this point? It seems that it's a remnant of something from the past. Is that something that could potentially be removed from the property or negotiated away? Because I don't know what they would ever do with it. That was originally part of the hydro corridor, which doesn't exist anymore, but it's only a small portion of that property. Is it possible to have that potentially negotiated off the property?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as I understand it, those lands are being protected at this time. Nothing is permanent. And as the development concepts come forward, there may be more opportunity to discuss that with the utilities.
I'd just add that we've had several conversations with Hydro about the whole easement that stretches all the way across, and they're not willing to release those opportunities until I'm not sure what the trigger is for reconsidering it, but at this point in time, they've been not favorable to releasing
It seems like a blanket policy as opposed to something specific because they don't have any plans there, obviously. In terms of just for absolute clarification for people who may be watching at home or in the audience that don't totally understand this process, it's a little different. Just re-emphasize the fact there is no application currently pending, and that diagram is simply blue sky at this point, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is a conceptual development scheme that shows the potential for the site to ensure that the minimum number of units can be achieved.
So what might actually come forward as an application may or may not look like that, but as long as it achieves the overall policies that we propose to put forward is what we're trying to achieve here, correct?
Correct.
In terms of the road, the through roads, Gatwick and Roxton, I believe it is. Is that correct? No, not Gatwick and Roxton.
Georgian.
Gatwick and Georgian. Are they? Are we proposing that those be absolutely enshrined in policy once we go through this process, or is that something that's still subject to negotiation at the point of sale application with a potential developer?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, at this time, both Georgian and Gatwick are shown as proposed roads in the official plan. Georgian is more of a likelihood because the region installed the signal that conformed with their environmental assessment for Trafalgar Road. So that is more likely to happen. The other roads, Georgian and the connection to Roxton through the site, are part of the conceptual scheme.
Okay. Now, what is the expectation of the return of an actual bylaw for our consideration? So tonight's the public hearing. You've got a lot of homework to do between now and the time you can actually give us a piece of paper to approve. What's the timing for that, do you expect at this point?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as I mentioned, there are a number of studies that are underway currently right now to better understand the site and any additional constraints that we may have. We are looking to turn this around quite quickly in the next couple months.
Okay. And last question for now is the Taunton Road you mentioned is a future road. I believe that's actually open now. Is that not correct?
I believe it is open all the way down to Glen Ashton.
And clarify for me, right now, Taunton, Taunton Road right now is only half of the ultimate build out of that road, correct?
We're correct.
So anybody that's concerned about the potential of that much traffic on that road needs not be concerned because that will be double the size once the developer kicks in their portion of the road.
Through you, Mr. Mayor,
cost.
through the Oak Park development, the Ballantree development, we had them build the interim condition of half the right-of-way. The other half is on the Public Works site.
Great. And the last, that was supposed to be my last question. I'm going to have one more last question. The parkland itself at the end of it, what is proposed for that? Simply just a green strip at this point?
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
You can't put plantings above pipeline. Is that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's conceptual and it hasn't been programmed yet through the Parks Department, but it was identified as desired.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Who's next? Well, let's see. Councillor Adams is on the other side of Trafalgar. Let's go with him next. And then we'll have visitors from over the creek.
They're welcome to visit. I just wanted to bring up one thing that we've discussed earlier already, and that is the mapping of the heights that are shown in this master plan. And you've shown some of the bonusing, which in theory could move around. I wondered whether staff would consider reviewing the issue of requiring additional height or the bonusing piece to be at the north end of the site. Right now, in this particular diagram, you're showing some of the extra height being at a more southerly location, and I'm not sure if that makes sense. I think it might make more sense for it to be at the corner up towards the north end.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have taken this under advisement. It did come up at the public information meeting held in September, and it is something that we would take a look at. Again, we are trying to be flexible with the heights on Georgian and excuse me, Trafalgar Road, and we do have the ability to move that around. The reason for the bonusing shown on two of the towers just to show that it is limited.
So there's a limit to how much bonusing can happen.
Yep.
My comment is, should we require any bonusing to happen in a particular location, for example, the northern end? So I'll leave
And
that.
we are taking that under advisement.
I'll leave that issue with you for consideration. Thanks very much.
Councillor Elgar, thanks for your patience.
No worries. The rest across the other side of the pond. In 2009, it was supposed to be 1,909 units were going to be placed in there. That was the plan.
There was a development scheme that looked at the potential for that many units to go on this site.
Okay, and that's where it was going to be 12 stories, but with Section 37 bonusing, it could go to 16 stories. Your plan now is to go to 16 stories and a bonusing to 20 stories.
On two of the buildings to limit the bonusing.
On the two of the buildings.
Potentially, yes.
But now, I know, and I noticed you said, the word you said was minimum 12, 15 number of units. I don't see that in the report that it's minimum, but you're saying that is the minimum. What is the maximum number of units that could be allowed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the maximum number of units will be looked at and will be assessed based on transportation capacity, parking, water, wastewater. So there are definite constraints to the site that would take place through the review of an application and have us seriously look at how many units are being proposed and what the viability of those units are. We're trying to allow for a variety of size of units as well as form, which allows for the townhouses.
So with the people and jobs per hectare, what is the number you're going with there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I cannot recall the density off the top of my head, but I can look into that and get back to you.
Okay, I'd appreciate that, because I'm just wondering what we have to live by now with that particular location, with the new rules.
I would also like to say we do have a minimum target that we have to comply with to meet the regional intensification targets, and we are doing so with 1,215.
Which is the people and jobs per hectare, is the target you're talking about. Okay. Okay, I thank you. I look forward to more information on this one.
Thank you. Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Your report talks about the 2009 Uptown Core Study. The transportation study is a little dated at this point, and that'll be coming back with the recommendation prior to the end of 2017?
Through you, Mr. Yes.
Thanks.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Your Worship. When you get this refined to a further extent, I presume then we'll be hosting another public information meeting of much more magnitude and many more people showing interest, because there doesn't seem to be much interest reflected here right now.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we did have a public information meeting that was advertised. There are, 4 people attended that meeting. There are 4 signs on the site providing information. We have not had a lot of feedback from the public at this time. And as we move closer towards the finalization of this plan, we will have to take into consideration further public consultation, if that's appropriate.
So will there be another one? We don't know?
She gave you a definite maybe.
Well, that's political, isn't it, Your
Confirmed.
Worship? All right, thank you. I hear what you say.
Councillor Grant.
Just to dovetail with that, though, I mean, we did get a number of people out for 278 Dundas. I assume that we had the same kind of notification for 278 Dundas, for this application that we had for 278 Dundas?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we did.
Councillor Knoll.
I have another last question.
You're entitled to as many last questions as you want.
Thank you, appreciate that. There's allocation assigned to this property right now, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the region has allocated 241 single detached equivalent units for this site. It would be enough to allow a beginning phase or 1 or 2 phases to progress. And after that, there's the question of capacity.
What is the math conversion on that to the number of condo units? Do you know off the top of your head, or?
I do not.
You do not?
480 units.
Gabe knew off the top of his
Apartment
head.
units. Well, that's why he's here.
Okay, thank you very much.
All righty then. Madam Clerk, are there listed delegations for this? No. Are there members of the public with information for council on this file? Is there a councillor with a motion to receive? Councillor Knoll, all in favor? And that carries. Item number 7, a recommendation report. Zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision. Sabrina Holmes again, but this is 181 Burl Oak Drive. And welcome, Rob Thun. And Council, Mr. Thun will summarize the report for the benefit of the public at home who may be wondering what we're talking about.
Thank you, Mayor Burton and members of council. This is the recommendation meeting on a zoning bylaw amendment and a draft plan of subdivision application submitted by Sabrina Holmes to rezone 181 Burloak Drive and to create a 4-lot residential plan of subdivision. The report can be found on page 89 of tonight's agenda. And one correction to the subject line in the staff report, it should read Z.173512. Quickly, the air photo identifies the subject application area and its context with the surrounding area. As you can see, the subject property is surrounded by single detached homes, and this property does front onto Burl Oak Drive and Wilmot Crescent. The site is designated low-density residential, and that official plan designation does permit detached dwellings with a maximum 29 units per site hectare. Looking at the proposal for the 4-lot plan of subdivision, it does conform to the use detached dwellings and the density at 13.8 units per site hectare for the provisions within the Livable Oakville plan. Staff have considered the merits of the proposal with regards to the intensification policies within section 11.1.8 of the Livable Oakville plan, and it does have consideration for appropriate intensification. Staff have also looked at it with regards to section 11.1.9 of the Livable Oakville plan and have determined that the 4-lot plan of subdivision and the built form that's being proposed does maintain and protect the existing neighborhood. From a zoning perspective, the site presently is zoned RL3, the majority of the site, and a very small portion of the site on Wilmot Crescent as RL5. The application was reviewed with regards to their submission, and staff are putting forth the following zoning recommendation and bylaw for council's consideration. It would reflect a zoning category of RL5 with a special provision 380 for the entire site. The property would be divided into 2 blocks, with block 1 representing lot 1 on Wilmot Crescent and block 2 representing the 3 lots on Burl Oak Drive. Zoning will capture within block 1 a minimum lot area, a minimum interior side yard, and a lot coverage for the dwelling. The purpose of those regulations were to address the public's concern with the division of the lot, drainage from the rear of lot 1 through to Wilmot Crescent, and the size of the home on the lot that could be created. Block 2 reflects a single regulation related to lot frontage at 13.2 meters. The slide before council is the draft plan of subdivision. As I mentioned, lot 1 fronts on Wilmot Crescent, and lots 2, 3, 4 are on Burl Oak Drive. The 3 lots on Burl Oak Drive have a frontage of 13.2 and a lot area of 528, and that is just below the existing RL3 zoning regulation for lot area, which is 557.7 or 0.5 square meters. The lot on Wilmot Crescent will be approximately 1,316 square meters. A public information meeting was held on May 9th. 10 members of the public were in attendance. The statutory meeting was held on June 12th. 4 members of the public spoke. The comments of the public are captured within the staff report. So in conclusion, Your Worship, the application that has been submitted and reviewed by staff does maintain and protect the character of the existing neighborhood, meets the intensification policies of the Livable Oakville plan, represents good planning, and completes the area of development. So in conclusion, Your Worship, staff put forth the following recommendation for council's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thun. Council questions? Councilor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Thun, there was some concern about drainage, in particular 2 things, about drainage on the property 1, yes, and also about the prospects for that property in the future to be severed again. Can you tell me what in the report or what we've done to ensure that both those things are addressed or have been addressed?
Through Your Worship to the councillor, lot 1 as shown on the draft plan is in this location fronting onto Wilmot Crescent. Development engineering staff have worked with a landowner to the, I'll call it the east in this case, with regards to some drainage issues and also related to a property to the north. A 3-meter interior side yard has been established in the zoning bylaw to allow for a 3-meter easement along this edge, to allow for a catch basin at the rear of the property in this corner to come out to Wilmot Crescent, therefore addressing the drainage features of drainage concerns related to the back portion of this property. Okay, and I'm sorry, the second question.
The prospect of a severance happening again on the lot 1 there.
Right. As mentioned, lot 1 is approximately 1,300 square meters. We have put in a regulation that that lot be 1,300 square meters to maintain the intent that it cannot be divided in the future. So the intent is to keep it as one lot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thun. Thank you.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Thun, when we previously did some development on this area of land, we had problems with drainage. Further to Councillor O'Mara's comments, we remedied it, and we seem to feel certain now that it's not going to reoccur. Mr. Jakimick is here, and he suffered a lot of pain with that drainage problem that existed when his area was developed. And how can you assure us that this won't continue to occur?
Well,
because it was frightening.
Through your worship to the councillor, development engineering staff has worked with the landowner who has raised this issue with concerns on drainage. There is a condition within the conditions of draft approval for the subdivision that the engineering analysis be undertaken to ensure that that drainage matter is addressed. And we have Darnell Lambert from development engineering who has worked on that proposal and that review as part of addressing this concern.
Would it be impolite to ask Mr. Lambert to comment to us on that?
Through you, Your Worship, I've met with Mr. Jakovic, who's in attendance this evening, and I've walked the site. I've reviewed the engineering plan that goes with this, and the solution that's being put forward with this development application will certainly resolve the issues in this area.
Okay. Thank you, Darnell. Thank you, Your Worship.
Any other questions, council? Is there a motion? Oh, are there members of the public with information for council? Is there a motion? Councillor Robinson, you're moving the staff recommendation?
I'm moving the staff recommendation.
Thank you, sir. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Number 8, recommendation report, zoning bylaw amendment, Golden Arch Tech Investment Corp., 2418 Khalsa Gate. And once again, Mr. Thun, please summarize the file for the folks at home.
Thank you, Mayor Burton and members of council. This is, again, as previous, is a recommendation meeting on a zoning bylaw amendment application submitted by Golden Arch Tech Investments Corporation for the development of a 10-story mixed-use development at 2418 Khalsa Gate. The report can be found on page 121 of tonight's agenda. With regards to the location, the star on the overhead identifies the application area and its context with the surrounding area. It should be noted that the subject property is located in the Palermo Village growth area. Surrounding land uses to this site, you have Brawny Road and residential to the west in this location here. Khalsa Gate and residential to the east and the south. Presently, there is a 3-story apartment complex being built by Ballantree Homes directly to the south of this property, and Peppergate Developments across the street on Khalsa Gate. Pine Glen Road and an EMS station and residential are to the north of the subject property. The slide before council right now reflects the proposal that is before council. It is 289 residential units, 608 square meters of commercial space captured within this 10-story building. Previously, the number before council for the residential units was 274. The built form has not changed. It's just a redistribution of 1- and 2-bedroom units within the site. Access points are from Khalsa Gate and Pine Glen. There will be no access from Brawny Road. The proposal also includes surplus land on Khalsa Gate, for which there is a conditional offer conditional purchase and sale with the town, and the Realty Services Department within the town's legal department is reviewing that, or dealing with that matter. A public information meeting was held on March 16th, 2016. No members of the public attended. The statutory public meeting was held on April 18th, 2016. No members of the public were in attendance for that meeting also. Section 4.1 of the Live Oakville Plan, Palermo Village is identified as one of the town's primary growth areas. The site is designated urban center. The proposal before council conforms to the minimum residential density of 100 units per site hectare, has a maximum floor space index of 3.7 lot area, which is below the maximum 4 FSI, conforms to the maximum height on a corner lot within Palermo Village at 10 stories. Proposal does reflect a mixed-use development with ground floor commercial and residential above. As mentioned, access is from Pine Glen and Calsa Gate, and the majority of parking, other than 38 spaces, is underground on 3 levels. The existing zoning on the site is ED within bylaw 2014-014. Staff are putting forth a site-specific zoning amendment for council's consideration, reflecting the following. The site be zoned to MU4. The identification of the front lot line as Calsa Gate. I have also included within the recommended zoning bylaw inclusions of various regulations including setbacks, balconies, terraces, air vent locations, and parking setbacks. The site-specific zoning put forth for consideration does reflect a design that is in keeping with the general intent of the Livable Oakville Plan, and more so for a growth area for Palermo. Staff will be working with the applicant through the site plan process to further refine the design. So in conclusion, Your Worship, staff are putting forth the following recommendation with regards to the Golden Arch Tech investment proposal for the corner of Calsa Gate and Pine Glen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thun. Councillor Elgar or Councillor Lapworth, questions?
Yes.
Councillor Elgar.
Thank you. I'm just trying to understand, Brawny Road will be widened to 3 or 6 lanes in, I think it's 2020, 2023 range. What is the setback from the road allowance to this building on the Bronte Road?
The zoning on this property will be basically 0 from a rear lot line on Brawny Road. Calsa Gate is the front. Pine Glen is the side.
No, I'm just concerned about Bronte.
Brawny is 0.
It's 0?
Yes.
Okay. And there will be balconies on the building?
The balconies will roughly be in that same setback range, but the main building will be 1.5 meters back.
I don't think we've done it very often, but are we considering looking going forward at the pollution from tailpipes when we're doing buildings with balconies, and what the air quality is like in throughout Oakville? Are we doing anything like that at all?
To my knowledge, through your worship, I don't believe so.
Okay. Now with this building, you may not be aware, but it's daily complaints of noise on Bronte Road. Now, I'm just wondering how this is going to be handled. What the noise will be like in this building for the residents, because it's also right by a stoplight, which of course you've got, and it's also a truck route.
Through your worship to Councillor Elgar, those construction techniques will be dealt with through the building permit process, and also there were noise studies and the traditional things like triple glazing, widening of walls, things like that. Through the building permit process, we'll be addressing the noise factor.
So this will be coming back to us so that when things go up for sale in this area, we will have a chance.
This is just the initial. There is still a site plan process. There is still a condominium process. Warning clauses can be included in such documents.
Yeah, 'cause it's a huge issue, and unfortunately, I don't have any magic here, and I don't think anybody else does. When the Bronte goes to 6 lanes, it's going to get a lot noisier. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Other questions, council? Are there listed delegations? No. Are there members of the public with information for council? Welcome. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. David Nelson, Ruth Victor and Associates, representing the owners of the property. With respect to Councillor Algar's question, there is a road widening included in this particular application that will reflect the need for lands on Bronte Road.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Councillor Elgar.
Mr. Nelson, with regard to air quality, do you do any studies?
Yes, the noise study specifically, we did not do an air quality study, no.
Are you aware of any municipalities that do air quality studies for buildings that are so close to
Not
major
aware of
roads?
any. The only one I've ever encountered was in the town of Milton, and that was with respect to a really nasty existing slaughterhouse.
That might have had something to do with smell, not so much the pollution I'm thinking
correct.
of. Though. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a member of council with a motion? Councillor Lapworth, are you moving the staff recommendation? Yes, I am. Thank you. All in favor? Opposed, if any, that carries. Thank you, everybody. Number 9. This is the item on which Councillor Robinson has declared a conflict, and Councillor, yes, okay. One thing at a time. So, Councillor Robinson, would you like to move back from the table or otherwise absent yourself from the item? And if we, I'm pretty sure that Mr. Thun will draw council's attention to the memo from Planning Services Department, so I'm going to leave everything to Mr. Thun here. Councillor O'Meara.
Your Worship, I'm not sure if there's anyone here who wants to see the presentation, but if there are, or delegate to it, happy to. Otherwise, I'd just be happy to move the report as is. I don't know. We saw this, council members, earlier, so I'll leave it to your discretion. But if we roll call it, I'm happy to move the recommendations and also include the further recommendation that Mr. Thun has added in the memo here.
Are there members of the public with an interest in this file here with us who want to share information?
I'm simply representing the applicant, Mr. Worship. Sorry.
Is there a member of council? Well, we'll find out. Council, it's proposed to, I propose to accept Councillor O'Meara's motion. Any objection? It's duly moved. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Councillor Robinson, you're back. So now, I would ask your attention to the advisory committee minutes for Livable Oakville Council Subcommittee meeting of September 11th and the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee from September 26th. Councillor Duddick. Councillor Duddick is moving approval of the minutes. All those in favor? And that carries. I'm going to recess the meeting now because we've ended the items that we advertised for tonight, and we will resume tomorrow night, and I look forward to everybody's smiling face. We'll see you then.